A captivating nanny reveals her secret affair, a must-see, a real-life tale of betrayal. Welcome to the raw and unfiltered confessions of infidelity. It all began on a balmy summer morning in Virginia. The air was thick with warmth, and I could sense my scarf adhering to my neck as I lingered outside the unassuming brick house. This marked my initial foray into the workforce in America, a stark contrast to the dusty streets of Belka where my journey began. Returning home. I never envisioned parting from my family or my little universe, yet life had a knack for throwing us curveballs. The Jacobs, an apparently ideal family of 4, were in search of a nanny. And I was in need of the funds. It wasn't merely about the paycheck, it was about demonstrating to my parents and siblings that I had the capability to succeed. To flourish in a country so distinct from my own. I was 33, single, and unapologetically self-reliant, a unique position for a woman in Jordan. Brianna Jacobs, the wife, exuded elegance and beauty. She donned fitted blouses and high-end heels that echoed against the marble floors of their expansive residence. She welcomed me with a radiant smile. Her golden locks elegantly gathered into a bun, and spoke in that thoughtful manner typical of Americans, as if each word she uttered held significant weight. Next, we had Zach Jacobs, the spouse. He stood tall, exuding a natural charm that effortlessly made you feel comfortable. His sandy brown hair curled slightly at the ends, and his laugh lines suggested a man who had experienced joy. Not merely stress. He remained mostly silent that day, merely nodding in acknowledgement as he offered me a cup of tea. Their children, Splendor and Emmanuel, were 5 and 3. Bursting with energy and an insatiable curiosity. I was, naturally, a bit anxious. I had never taken on the role of a nanny before. But Brianna confidently assured me that my experience as the oldest of 6 siblings would be more than enough. She exhibited kindness, yet it was evident that she held herself to high standards. She presented me with a hefty binder filled with regulations, meal schedules, daily agendas, emergency contacts, and even guidelines for folding laundry. The initial weeks passed without any notable events. I would rise at 6 a.m., whip up breakfast, pack Splendor's lunch for school, and keep Emmanuel engaged until it was time for his nap. My days were brimming with storybooks, vibrant finger painting, and the joyful pursuit of Emmanuel around the backyard. At night, I would find solace in my cozy basement room, feeling both weary and satisfied. It was one afternoon, roughly a month into the job, when I became aware of Zach observing me. I was perched on the spill that Emmanuel had created with his juice box when I sensed his gaze upon me. "You're incredible with them," he remarked, leaning against the counter. I glanced upward, taken aback. "Thank you very much, kind sir. Please call me Zach," he said, a smile spreading across his face. I nodded, warmth flooding my cheeks. It wasn't just his words, but the manner in which he expressed them, as if he truly believed in what he was saying. At home, men seldom addressed women with such warmth unless they had hidden intentions. Yet Zach appeared to be an exception. From that day, I started to pay closer attention to him, noticing how he consistently inquired if I had eaten, how he volunteered to assist with the groceries, and how he would hang around in the kitchen while I prepared meals. Brianna, in contrast, frequently found herself absent, preoccupied with her demanding corporate career. "Do you never feel weary?" Zach inquired one evening while I was arranging the dining table. "Weary of what?" "Of catering to the needs of all." I shrugged. "This is my profession. I've grown accustomed to it." "You shouldn't have to be," he said, his voice gentle. His words resonated within me long after he departed the room. It felt peculiar to be observed in such a manner. In my culture, women were expected to give endlessly, to serve without question, yet Zach's words made me feel valued. I attempted to brush it aside, naturally. I recalled my identity and the principles I held dear. I was a woman of faith, deeply rooted in my beliefs and customs. There were boundaries I could never breach, regardless of how gracious or charming my employer might be. However, as I would soon discover, life had different intentions. The summer seemed to go on forever, with days that were long and sweltering. Brianna's work trips became increasingly frequent, leaving Zach and me to manage the children on our own. Gradually, the lines started to fade. Initially, it was pure, filled with playful banter, fleeting looks, and laid-back chats that stretched on just a bit too long. Yet, beneath the surface, I was aware that I was navigating treacherous waters. I frequently recalled my mother's voice, firm and resolute. "Alia, keep in mind your true essence. The world may lure you in, yet it is essential to remain authentic to who you are." I had always taken great pride in my self-discipline, my capacity to withstand the allure of contemporary life. However, Zach stood apart from the rest. A rainy evening set the stage for a change in the air. The children lay in peaceful slumber, the house enveloped in stillness, save for the gentle patter of rain against the windows. As I tidied the kitchen after dinner, Zach strolled in. "Could you lend a hand?" he inquired, pushing up his sleeves. "No, it's fine, I'm nearly finished," I responded, yet he lingered regardless. We toiled in quietude for some time, the atmosphere thick with unvoiced thoughts. At last, he shattered the stillness. "Do you ever long for the comforts of home?" he inquired. "Each day," I acknowledged, "yet I arrived here for a purpose." "You've given up so much," he remarked, his tone laced with respect. I gazed at him, taken aback. "What makes you say that?" "Because I perceive it. Your selflessness shines through, always prioritizing others and never voicing a complaint. It's uncommon." His words took me by surprise. No one had ever addressed me in such a manner before. Not even back home. I experienced an unusual blend of appreciation and remorse, as if I were violating something hallowed merely by paying attention. "It's just a simple thing," I replied, downplaying the praise. "It is to me," he replied, his gaze locking with mine. In that instant, a change occurred between us. It was nuanced, nearly undetectable, yet there existed a connection. A spark, a silent acknowledgement of something neither of us dared to name. That night, I lay in bed with a weight on my chest, caught in the struggle between my beliefs and the undeniable emotions that surged within me. I sought strength, clarity, and the courage to remain steadfast on the right path. Yet, beneath the surface, I sensed that my reality was on the brink of transformation in ways I could never have envisioned. I believed I could maintain a sense of professionalism, that any transient bond one experienced with Zach would dissipate like a drifting cloud. Yet, existence is seldom that straightforward. Every day unfolded with fresh moments, minor and seemingly trivial at first glance, yet each one gradually wore down the barriers I had constructed around my heart. Brianna's absence turned into a habit. She was heading to conferences in New York, attending business meetings in Chicago, or enjoying overnight stays at luxury hotels I had only glimpsed in magazines. Zach took on the role of the unwavering parent, while I assumed my place beside him, companion in the everyday turbulence of raising Splendor and Emmanuel. The children cherished him. Splendor would settle onto his lap during story time, her tiny hands gripping his shirt as he read aloud in amusing voices. Emmanuel trailed behind him, echoing his every move. Shift. Observing them together, I noticed a facet of Zach that was gentle and open, and it awakened something within me that I couldn't fully identify. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the living room, Zach entered, holding a box. He placed it on the coffee table, saying, "I thought you might like this." "What is it?" I inquired, wiping my hands on my apron. He lifted the lid of the box, unveiling a collection of cookbooks. "I've observed that you've been experimenting with different recipes recently. I thought this could spark some inspiration for you." I gazed at him, utterly at a loss for words. It wasn't merely the present but rather the sentiment that accompanied it. No one had ever seen the subtle details of my actions, much less valued them. "Thank you," I murmured, the words trembling as they lingered in my throat. "It's nothing," he replied. Yet his gaze conveyed a different story. That evening, once the children had drifted off to sleep, Zach and I found ourselves back in the kitchen once more. These tranquil moments following the day's turmoil had transformed into a cherished ritual. I was cleaning the counters when he began to speak. "Aaliyah, you put in a tremendous amount of effort." I glanced upward, taken aback. "This is my profession." "No," he said, shaking his head, "you go above and beyond your duties. You show concern. You cherish these kids as if they were your own." "They're simple to adore," I remarked, attempting to divert the conversation. "Indeed, you are." The air was thick with unspoken words, laden with a sense of peril. I stood still, caught in a moment of uncertainty about how to reply. "Aaliyah," I started, but he cut me off. "I'm sorry," he said hastily, "I shouldn't have mentioned that." "No, it's fine," I replied, even though it truly wasn't. We lingered in quietude, the gravity of his words bearing heavily upon us. I felt the urge to express to him that he was mistaken, that loving me wasn't a simple task. That I was intricate and imperfect, constrained by principles he could never grasp. Yet, I remained silent. The days slipped away in a haze. I attempted to persuade myself that everything remained the same, yet deep within, I understood that it had not. Zach's presence permeated the atmosphere. His laughter resonated throughout the house. His fragrance hung in the atmosphere, and his voice replayed in my thoughts long after he had departed. I started to observe the subtle details about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he hummed softly under his breath while washing the dishes, and how he always ensured the kids said, "Thank you and please." He wasn't merely kind. He possessed a thoughtfulness that seemed both rare and invaluable. One afternoon, while I was pushing Splendor on the swing in the backyard, Zach emerged with a tray of iced tea. "I thought you could use a break," he remarked, offering me a glass. "Thank you," I replied, accepting it with appreciation. We lingered on the porch steps, observing the children at play. "Have you ever pondered what your life might have turned out to be?" he inquired abruptly. I gazed at him, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "If you had remained in Balka. If you hadn't made your way here." I acknowledged it constantly. "However, I arrived here with a purpose." "Have you discovered it?" he inquired, his eyes unwavering. I paused, uncertain of how to respond. "In certain respects, indeed. However, in some cases, it's quite intricate." He nodded, as if he grasped the meaning. "Life certainly has a knack for catching us off guard, doesn't it?" "It does," I agreed, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. For a moment, we lingered in silence, the atmosphere around us heavy with unexpressed thoughts. I wished to express to him the depth of my gratitude for his kindness. How his presence had transformed into a solace in a world that frequently seemed isolating and unfamiliar. However, I was unable to. I would not. That evening, I found myself wide awake in my room, gazing up at the ceiling. I reflected on my family back home, on my mother's heartfelt prayers and my father's serious admonitions. "Remain steadfast in your beliefs," they had always advised. "Always remember your true self." I longed to think I was still that girl, the one who prayed 5 times a day, and wore her scarf with pride. Yet, the reality was that I was undergoing a transformation, and it filled me with dread. The following morning, I did my best to steer clear of Zach. I immersed myself in tasks, maintaining a low profile and concentrating my thoughts. However, by the afternoon, evading him became an impossible task. He discovered me in the laundry room, sifting through a heap of garments. "Aaliyah," he murmured, his tone gentle. I kept my gaze down. "Absolutely. Are you all right?" I'm okay, I replied hastily, yet he remained unconvinced. Please don't shut me out, he said, moving in closer. I realize I overstepped my bounds. It's not about you, I interjected, finally meeting his gaze. It revolves around my personal convictions, my principles, my trust. I comprehend, he stated, yet the expression in his gaze revealed that he truly did not. How could he? I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. I am unable to accomplish this. He nodded slowly, his face etched with a deep sense of regret. I apologize, Aaliyah. I never intended to put you in an awkward position. I said quickly, you didn't. That is the issue. For a moment, we simply stood there, the silence enveloping us, conveying everything we couldn't express. I'll give you space, he said at last. Thank you, I whispered, my voice quivering. As he exited the room, a surge of relief washed over me, intertwined with a longing I couldn't fully identify. I understood I was on the right path, yet it didn't alleviate the difficulty. That evening, I sought solace in prayer more fervently than I ever had in my life. I sought fortitude, direction, and the bravery to remain authentic to my essence. As I knelt on the floor, tears streaming down my face, a realization washed over me. I was not merely battling temptation. I was battling a part of myself that felt unfamiliar. The days following our discussion in the laundry room were filled with tension, yet still within the realm of manageability. Zach honored his commitment to allow me some distance, and I dedicated myself to redirecting my attention to my work. I immersed myself in caring for Splendor and Emmanuel, organizing crafts and baking projects that kept us engaged from morning until bedtime. Yet, despite my hands being busy, my thoughts drifted to him. Zach maintained a polite demeanor, seemingly aloof, and I assured myself that this was the most prudent path ahead. We might choose to act as if nothing had transpired, as if the confessions exchanged in the laundry room were merely a fleeting lapse in judgment. For a time, it nearly succeeded. Then arrived the tempest. It was a Friday evening, just after sunset, when the rain started to fall. The thunder rumbled first, rattling the windows and surprising Emmanuel, who grasped my leg while I tidied the dinner table. No need to fret, Emmanuel, I reassured him, lifting him into my arms. It's merely a slight sound. Allow me to prepare you for bedtime, if that's all right. I took him upstairs, immersing myself in his favorite bedtime story. As the rain cascaded down outside, once the children had drifted off to sleep, the storm intensified. The wind howled, and an unsettling silence enveloped the house, contrasting sharply with the turmoil beyond its walls. I made my way downstairs, anticipating that Zach would be in his familiar place on the couch. Instead, I discovered him in the kitchen, gazing out the window with a glass of wine cradled in his hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and the gentle illumination of the kitchen light accentuated the defined contours of his jaw. He appeared lost in contemplation, and I lingered in the doorway, uncertain whether to break the silence. It seems you are looking for something specific. Do you happen to avoid wine? He inquired without glancing back, as though he could feel my presence. No, I replied, stepping into the room. It contradicts my beliefs. He nodded, finally directing his gaze towards me. I suspected that would be the case. You stand out. Is that a negative aspect? I inquired, a subtle smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Not at all, he replied, his voice gentle. It's invigorating. I occupied my time by cleaning the counters, attempting to disregard how his words sent my heart racing. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, and I could sense his gaze fixed on me as I toiled away. Aaliyah, he finally spoke after a prolonged pause. Indeed, I responded, my gaze fixed elsewhere. Could we have a conversation? I paused my actions and turned to confront him. Concerning what? Regarding us, he remarked, his tone subdued. I shook my head, my heart racing. There is not. Us, Zach. Then why can't I stop thinking about you? He asked, stepping closer. Zach, please, I started, but he cut me off. I understand it's not right, he admitted, his voice quivering. I understand that I shouldn't feel this way, yet I find myself unable to change it. I notice you each day, nurturing my children, transforming this house into a true home, and I. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I've never encountered anyone quite like you. My breath hitched in my throat. His words resonated with all that I sought to dismiss. All that I convinced myself I had no desire to acknowledge. Yet, listening to their words now, articulated in the air, rendered it undeniable what was unfolding between us. Zach, I said. My voice barely above a whisper, you're married. A family is part of your life. I know, he said, his eyes brimming with anguish. Yet, Brianna is perpetually absent, constantly occupied. And when she does appear, it feels as though we are mere acquaintances. You are the sole person who evokes my emotions. He paused once more, as though the words were too challenging to articulate. I stood paralyzed, caught in the conflict between the part of me that recognized the wrongness of the situation and the part that yearned to feel desired, valued, and acknowledged. Zach. I murmured, yet it wasn't a request for him to cease. It was a completely different experience, a yielding. He bridged the gap between us, his lips finding mine in a kiss that began softly, then intensified as we surrendered to the feelings we had both been resisting for far too long. His hand glided to my waist, drawing me nearer, and I felt myself dissolving into him, losing sight of everything else. Brianna, the kids, my beliefs, my loved ones. At that instant, he was the sole focus. That night, our connection went beyond just a kiss. As the tempest howled beyond our walls, we stepped over a threshold that would forever remain uncrossable. He guided me upstairs to his bedroom, his touch sparking a flame within me that I had never realized was there. I allowed him to remove my clothing, his hands reverently exploring every part of my body as if I were something divine. In his embrace, I experienced a sense of beauty, strength, and complete liberation. It was completely different from what I had envisioned back home. Intimacy remained an unspoken subject, a taboo that lingered solely in hushed tones behind closed doors. However, with Zach, it was distinct. He was observant, understanding, and fervent, evoking emotions in me that I had never imagined before. For the first time in my life, I experienced a profound sense of being wanted. As it came to an end, we found ourselves intertwined, the rhythmic patter of rain drumming against the windows surrounding us. I was aware that I ought to feel guilty, perhaps even ashamed, and certainly disgusted with myself. However, I did not. Instead, I experienced an unusual tranquility, as if I had at last discovered the elusive fragment of my being. The following morning, the weight of reality crashed down on me like a freight train. While preparing the children for breakfast, I averted my eyes from Zach, the heaviness of our actions bearing down on me. Yet, when he locked eyes with me and offered a subtle, knowing smile, I experienced that same exhilarating rush of adrenaline I had felt the previous night. It didn't end there. In the coming weeks, we discovered ourselves capturing fleeting moments whenever possible, a lingering touch as we brushed past in the hallway, a hushed conversation in the kitchen after the children had drifted off to sleep, a swift embrace behind closed doors. Every time, I convinced myself it would be the final instance. Yet it never turned out that way. Zach ensnared me, and I found myself utterly unable to break free from his allure. He caused me to lose sight of everything, my beliefs, my background, the principles I once cherished deeply. For a time, I allowed myself to think that we could maintain this facade, that we could thrive in our own secluded realm without the outside world ever discovering our secret. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood it was only a matter of time before it all unraveled. And when the inevitable collapse occurred, it would bring nothing but ruin in its aftermath. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. A blur of stolen moments and whispered promises that filled my days with a mix of exhilaration and apprehension. Zach and I navigated our secret moments with a blend of caution and abandon. Stealing time together in the quiet hours when Brianna was away, the children were tucked in, or the house lay still and empty. Every time our hands met, I convinced myself it would be the final moment, yet it never turned out that way. I sensed that I was navigating two distinct existences. Throughout the day, I embodied Aaliyah, the caring nanny who shared enchanting bedtime stories, prepared delicious meals, and greeted Splendor and Emmanuel with a warm smile. Yet, as night enveloped the world in silence and the house succumbed to shadows, I transformed into an entirely different person. One who was intertwined with Zach in ways I had never experienced with anyone else. One evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Zach discovered me in the living room, diligently folding laundry. Brianna had departed that morning for yet another work trip, leaving the house in an unusual silence. He lingered in the doorway, observing me, his aura saturating the space long before he uttered a word. "Do you ever stop working?" he inquired, a hint of amusement coloring his voice. I glanced upward, a smile breaking through my facade. "It's essential for someone to ensure this place continues to operate smoothly." He moved across the room and settled next to me, our thighs lightly touching. "You truly are remarkable. Have you realized that?" I chuckled quietly, shaking my head. "I'm simply fulfilling my responsibilities." "No," he said, his tone now grave. "You are beyond just that. Your contributions to this family surpass anything Brianna or I could ever achieve." A wave of remorse washed over me at the mention of her name. "It's best not to express that." "Why not?" "It is indeed true." I averted my eyes, concentrating on the heap of garments before me. "You have feelings for her, Zach. She is your spouse." He let out a deep sigh, his fingers tangling in his hair. "I care for her deeply, yet not in the manner that I ought to. Not how I cherish you." His words lingered in the atmosphere, dense and unmistakable. I felt compelled to express to him that he was mistaken, that he was incapable of loving me, that our actions were merely a misstep. Yet, I found myself unable to, for within me, I recognized that my feelings mirrored those thoughts. He extended his hand, his fingers weaving together with mine. "Aaliyah, gaze upon me." With a sense of hesitation, I raised my gaze to connect with his. The power in his gaze left me momentarily breathless. "You mean everything to me," he expressed. "I understand this may not be the best choice. Yet I can't fathom my existence without you." The tears I had been suppressing finally flowed, and he enveloped me in his embrace, holding me close as I wept. "I apologize," I murmured. "I never intended for this to occur." "Nor did I," he murmured gently. "However, I have no regrets about it." As the weeks stretched into months, our affair grew increasingly difficult to conceal. Brianna's absences allowed us to explore our secret relationship, yet the times she was present felt intolerable. I steered clear of her whenever possible, feeling a deep sense of shame that kept me from meeting her gaze. She showed me kindness, placed her trust in me, and remained completely oblivious to the treachery brewing within her own home. "Aaliyah, you've been an incredible gift to this family," she remarked one evening as we gathered in the kitchen. "I can't quite fathom how we got by before you arrived." Her words pierced through me, sharp and unforgiving, yet I managed to muster a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Jacob. Please call me Brianna," she said, her laughter dancing in the air. "You're almost like one of us." Her trust only intensified my guilt, yet it failed to deter me. Every night, once Brianna settled into her slumber, Zach would seek me out. At times, we would engage in conversation, while at other moments, we would just embrace, enveloped in the quietude of our surroundings. More frequently than not, we found ourselves in his bed, entwined in a fervor that made me lose sight of everything else. One evening, after Brianna had departed for a weekend conference, Zach and I enjoyed a bottle of wine in the living room. I hadn't intended to drink, but he was persistent, filling a small glass and playfully coaxing me until I finally took a sip. The comforting embrace of the wine enveloped me, easing the rigid hold of my restraint. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice deep and languid. "Are you aware of that?" I shook my head, warmth creeping into my cheeks. "You're merely expressing that." "I'm not," he said, leaning in closer. "You are the most stunning woman I have ever encountered." Before I could react, he kissed me, his lips enveloping mine in a manner that brooked no uncertainty. This wasn't merely desire, it was an intricate connection, something neither of us could articulate. His hands found their way to my waist, drawing me nearer, and I felt myself yield entirely. That night, we never made it to the bedroom. Instead, we remained on the living room floor, the flickering light of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls as we became enveloped in one another. It was intense, unfiltered, and utterly captivating. The following morning, I found myself waking up in his embrace, the memories of the previous night swirling through my thoughts. I ought to have experienced shame. Yet what I truly felt was an unusual sense of satisfaction. After a lengthy period, I experienced a sense of belonging. As I donned my clothes and set about making breakfast for the children, Zach entered the kitchen, his expression gentle. "Good morning," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. "Good morning," I responded, making an effort to maintain a calm tone. "We need to have a conversation," he stated, his tone now grave. I acknowledged his insight with a nod, fully aware of its truth. We could no longer maintain the illusion that this wasn't occurring. We could no longer sustain the illusion of the fantasy world we had built. Yet, even in my acceptance, a fragment of my being hesitated to release its grip. The days following that night in the living room drifted by in a blur. Zach and I grew increasingly daring, devoured by the flames we had unleashed. Every moment spent with him was like a precious gem, a hidden truth that I held dear yet approached with caution. As we continued to share moments, the weight of guilt became increasingly burdensome. Brianna came back from her conference the next Monday, her presence in the house a vivid reminder of the life Zach and I was taking it apart piece by piece. She radiated warmth and cheerfulness, blissfully unaware of the treachery unfolding in the shadows. Observing her engage with the children, I was overcome by a profound sense of shame. She was not worthy of this fate. None of them did. One evening, after Brianna had gone to bed, I found myself sitting on the porch steps, gazing out at the shadowed heavens. The atmosphere was invigorating, the stars twinkling like delicate fragments of crystal. I tightened my scarf around my shoulders, attempting to shield myself from the cold and the tumultuous thoughts swirling in my mind. Zach arrived shortly after, his footsteps gentle on the wooden floor. He settled next to. We were so near that our shoulders touched. "You've been silent," he remarked, his tone subdued. "I've been contemplating," I responded, avoiding his gaze, "about our relationship." I nodded, feeling a constriction in my throat. "Zach, we cannot continue down this path." He let out a deep breath, his fingers combing through his hair. "I understand, it's intricate." "It's not merely intricate," I cut off, my voice quivering. "It is incorrect. You possess a spouse, a family, and I do as well. I've become completely absorbed in this. I can hardly identify myself these days." He extended his hand toward mine, his touch soft and tender. "You remain yourself, Aaliyah. You are the one who cherishes my children as if they were your own, the one who has revitalized this home with your presence. Don't allow this to spoil it all." I withdrew my hand, tears welling in my eyes. "However, it has, Zach. Can't you understand? We've completely messed it all up." For the first time, his calm demeanor faltered. "I love you, Aaliyah," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. I cannot bear the thought of losing you. His words pierced me deeply, leaving a lasting impact. I loved him as well, there was no denying that any longer. Yet, affection alone couldn't mend the wounds we had inflicted. I love you too, I whispered, the confession rolling out before I could halt it. However, this is tearing me apart. In the week that followed, I came to a conclusion. I realized I had to leave, not in this way. The burden of our actions was overwhelming. And I could no longer reside in a home constructed on deceit. I started my discreet search for a new job, contacting agencies and families looking for a nanny. It was quite a challenge. I had developed a deep bond with Splendor and Emmanuel, and the idea of parting ways with them shattered my heart. Yet, I understood it was the sole path to my salvation. One evening, as I was tucking Splendor into bed, she looked up at me with her wide blue eyes and asked, "Aaliyah, are you leaving?" Her question caught me off guard. "What makes you think that, darling?" "You've been feeling down," she stated plainly, "and Dad says that people tend to go away when they're feeling this way." I managed a smile, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm staying put for the moment, Splendor. It's time to get some rest, all right." She nodded, her eyes fluttering shut. As I exited the room, her words echoed in my thoughts. Individuals depart when they feel sorrowful. She was indeed correct. I was departing because I could no longer remain in a space that had turned into a confinement of my own creation. After a fortnight, I submitted my resignation. Brianna was taken aback, her face reflecting a blend of bewilderment and worry. "Aaliyah, is everything all right?" she inquired, placing her coffee cup gently on the counter. "Indeed, Mrs. Jacob," I replied, maintaining a calm tone. "However, I have received another opportunity. And I believe it is time for me to transition to a new chapter." She appeared truly wounded. "You have played a vital role in this family. Are you certain about this?" I nodded, my gaze falling away from hers. "I am confident." Zach remained quite reserved when I shared the news with him. He merely nodded, his jaw clenched, his eyes brimming with an emotion I couldn't fully identify. Fury, sorrow, remorse. "I suppose I can't sway your thoughts, can I?" he inquired softly. "No," I stated, my voice resolute. "I must accomplish this task." The day I departed was filled with mixed emotions. Splendor and Emmanuel held onto me tightly, their tearful farewells shattering my heart. Brianna embraced me warmly, expressing her gratitude for all I had done for their family. And Zach lingered quietly by the door, his hands tightly balled into fists at his sides. As I placed my suitcase into the taxi, a peculiar sense of relief washed over me. The dwelling that had served as both my sanctuary and my confinement receded into the background as the vehicle drove off. I was uncertain about what lay ahead, yet one truth remained clear. I needed to rediscover who I truly was. I needed to rediscover the beliefs and principles I had set aside. And I needed to let go of all my past mistakes. That evening, in the modest apartment I had rented across town, I found myself kneeling on the floor, praying for the first time in months. A wave of tranquility enveloped me. I wasn't flawless, and I had my share of missteps. However, I was prepared to begin anew. Hello, everyone. If you found this tale captivating and wish to explore more narratives like this, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe for a fresh dose of astonishing stories each week. Be sure to enable notifications, ensuring you stay updated with every new development. If you possess your own adventurous tales to share or concepts you'd like us to bring to fruition, feel free to leave them in the comments. I would be eager to listen to them. Thank you for tuning in.